From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana. When the announcement came, it was unprecedented.
An arrest warrant has been issued by the High Court for a British soldier in connection with the murder of 21-year-old Agnes Wanjiru in 2012, setting the stage for the extradition process in the United Kingdom.
The family of the late Agnes Wanjiru says it has optimistically but cautiously welcomed the issuance of an arrest warrant against a British national accused of committing murder 13 years ago in Nanyuki, Laikipia County.
For the first time, a British soldier could be extradited to face murder charges in another country. And it's happened because of a long and detailed investigation by the Sunday Times.
We were in Kenya working undercover. It was when we were there that I said to my colleague George, look, there's this unsolved murder case in Nanyuki, and I think it is worthy of investigation. Should we take a look at it again?
It's been 13 years since 21-year-old Agnes Wanjiru died. Why has it taken so long for the wheels of justice to move? And what happens next? The story today, the killing of Agnes Wanjiru. An arrest warrant is issued. Well, David, amazing to be talking again 4 years on after we first talked about this story. I mean, how many years has it been for you looking into it now?
Oh, God. I think my first story on it was when her body was found. So, yeah, more than 13 years ago. This
is the inimitable David Collins.
I'm the Northern editor of the Sunday Times. I'm an investigative reporter. I guess I specialise in crime and justice issues.
Well, David, a lot of this wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for your investigation and your persistence with this story. Just explain to us what's happened this week.
So this week we have seen a warrant of arrest issued for a British national. He is a former British soldier, and it's a warrant of arrest for him to be brought before a court in Nairobi, in Kenya, for charges of murder, the murder of Agnes Wanjiru, which happened in March the 31st, 2012.
How did it feel when you heard that there'd been an arrest?
It was obviously a massive moment. It was a big moment. There was quite a lot of relief just because we'd reported in the Sunday Times 2 months ago that it was going to happen. The family, they feel, I don't know if overjoyed is the right word. That isn't the right word. But they feel like this is obviously a major step towards justice for them. They've been campaigning for 13 years. I'm just glad that this is now moving.
And it is, as you say, an extraordinary moment. It's been 13 years in the making. What happens next? Well, will this soldier be extradited?
So what happens next is that the Kenyan government will file an extradition request. That goes to something called the UK Central Office, which is a little department inside the Home Office, which deals with extradition requests from foreign states. That then has to be signed off and certified, if you like, by the Home Secretary. Then it goes into the court system. Usually extradition proceedings and requests are heard by Westminster Megs. What will happen is a judge will be appointed. The judge will ask to see the evidence in relation to the request. And then on the basis of that, we will probably see an arrest. And the suspect will be brought before the court and will be asked, basically, do you agree to be extradited or don't you? And if you don't, what's your case for not being extradited? If the suspect says they don't want to be extradited, then there will be a series of hearings, basically, where evidence is presented from each side, like a mini trial where you hear the evidence and the judge will make a decision on whether or not there's sufficient evidence and a case to extradite the suspect.
And David, what do we know about the soldier who's facing these charges?
He was attached to the Duke of Lancaster Regiment. There's a request by the judge for the jurisdiction there is Kenya to not name him. Kenyan media some have named him, some haven't. It's on social media, and he was on the front page of one of Kenya's biggest newspapers.
We last spoke to David and our old colleague Hannah Al Othman about their investigation into Agnes's death in 2021, and I wanted to play you a bit of that episode. This is Hannah setting the scene of the night that Agnes disappeared on March the 31st, 2012. It starts in the sports bar of a hotel called the Lions Court Inn in Nanyuki, central Kenya. Here's Hannah.
It had a fireplace at one end with sort of tables around that and chairs where some people were sitting down. There was music, there was dancing.
Hannah is describing the scene at the bar one Saturday in March 2012. That night, a group of British soldiers were letting off steam.
We understand there were around 60 British soldiers there that night. They'd been on hot weather training, but they had some time off to sort of enjoy themselves.
Nanyuki is a relatively small town, and it's just down the road from a British military training base. It's where infantrymen would be sent for hot weather training before they were deployed to places like Afghanistan.
There were local people, there were a handful of non-soldiers, but white people who I think lived locally, and then a sizable number of sex workers there as well, drinking and dancing with the soldiers and with other men in the bar.
The Lions Court Inn is a regular haunt for expats and British soldiers, and that night, things were getting raucous. The soldiers had already been drinking before they arrived.
They had been to a supermarket to buy alcohol. My understanding is that's where they first picked up some of the sex workers. People were drinking heavily. They were drinking a lot.
9 of these soldiers had booked rooms at the Lions Court Inn, which were arranged as little huts around a courtyard.
One of the people I spoke to, his recollection was the closest ones were about 5 minutes walk from the bar. Some were a bit further away. They would go to the bar, have a drink, have a dance with a girl, take her back to the room, and then come back and do the same again and pick up another woman. And some of the men were doing this all night.
At the time, Agnes was supporting herself and her daughter through sex work. Hannah and David heard that British soldiers would pay up to £30 for sex, but sometimes, in Nanyuki, they would only pay a couple of pounds a time.
This was nearly a decade ago, and the difficulty is that the men that we're speaking to, they don't remember the names and the faces of the women that they had sex with that night. They don't think they saw Agnes, but our understanding was that she was in that bar. She was there with 2 friends. And I imagine she was among the women that were being ferried back and forth to these little individual huts where the soldiers were staying. That's what the accommodation was like.
The hazy accounts of the soldiers were just one piece of the puzzle. David and Hannah have also been trawling through leaked documents which revealed details of what happened that night.
So what we know, on the 31st of March 2012, which was a Saturday, Agnes had her daughter Stacey. She dropped off her daughter, who was 5 months old, just a baby, at her friend's. She was worried at the time about being able to feed Stacey, about clothing, about really basic stuff. So she drops off Stacey at a friend's house to do childcare, and then she goes into town with a woman called Florence, and the 2 of them went to a bar called Charlotte's Hotel.
According to a witness statement provided by Florence, It was in this bar that Agnes first began talking to a British soldier.
They're chatting away and getting on very well, and Florence thinks, well, our final destination where we've agreed to go is the Lions Court Hotel. That's like the big popular night spot. So Florence asks for money for a boda boda, which is like a motorcycle taxi, and she goes off first down to Lions Court Hotel, and Florence goes in. It's busy, it's packed, there's lots of soldiers there already, drunk, and she finds another friend called Susan.
Florence and Susan are both sipping water on the edge of the dance floor at the Lions Court Inn, when suddenly, at around 9 p.m, Agnes bursts in.
Sits down at the table, breathless. She's sweating, she has been running, and they say, what's wrong? And Agnes basically says, I've just picked a Johnny's pocket.
A Johnny is local slang for a British soldier.
I need money for Stacey. Picked his pocket. I took a big risk, but there's nothing in the wallet.
Her friends calm her down. All three are now together in the bar at the Lions Court Inn.
Agnes started talking to a British soldier. She was drinking with him. He was buying her drinks. They were sat down together at a table at one point. They were dancing together. And then they both saw Agnes and the soldier walking out of the bar towards the area of the hotel where the rooms are. And they're being escorted by a night guard employed by the hotel.
After some time, Agnes's friends started to wonder where she was.
So Florence leaves at 12 o'clock because basically her mum rings and says, you've got to come back and look after your baby. Susan stays longer, waiting for Agnes. So she doesn't want to leave her on her own in a big group of British soldiers getting rowdy. So she stays till 3 o'clock in the morning, and still Agnes doesn't appear.
Eventually, Susan heads home too.
And that is the last anybody sees of Agnes walking off to the room with that soldier.
The next day, Agnes's family are starting to panic, especially her sister, Rose. Here's Rose's daughter, Agnes's niece, Esther.
When Mom came at home, she found that she's not in, and then she asked where she has gone, and then my sister said that she had gone with her friend Florence. The following day, we kept waiting for her to come, and then she had not yet come.
Because she got a child, she got Stacey, a 5-month-old baby who's still being looked after by a neighbour. It's not like Agnes to just leave Stacey. They realise Sunday afternoon something is badly wrong.
Her family, her friends, and the police begin a search.
They asked if Rose had seen her, and then Rose said no, she had not seen her from the previous day that she went missing. Rose learned from Susan that Agnes had met a British soldier at Lions Court Hotel, and they went to her room. Rose frantically looked for Agnes with her uncle, but they did not find her.
Her friends went back to the hotel where Agnes was last seen.
They did a search of all the rooms. I don't know how thorough that search was by the staff of the hotel. And then the police do a search as well. They don't find anything suspicious, they say. And that is basically it. That is all that happens.
No sign of Agnes emerges in the days and weeks that follow, until 2 months later, back at the Lions Court Inn.
The hotel manager was walking around the grounds of the hotel, and he smells a fetid smell. He decides that the sewage system needs to be cleaned. All the waste and sewage for the hotel goes into these 3 septic tanks. The head of maintenance heads down and opens up the manholes, these big metal lids, and he lifts one off and looks inside, and inside the tank he sees a submerged body.
The submerged body was Agnes. She was naked, except for a white bra and a necklace.
When she was found, they discovered that she'd been beaten and she'd been stabbed.
It was her sister, Rose, who had to identify the body. The post-mortem examination would later conclude that as well as being badly beaten, Agnes had died as a result of stab wounds to her lower right abdomen and her chest. A detail that Hannah and David keep coming back to is that on the night that Agnes disappeared, the hotel was busy. Surely somebody must have seen something.
People about all night on the phone, having a cigarette, nipping back to their rooms for some more cash or to check on their belongings. These were small double rooms, but in some cases there were 3 soldiers sharing one room, and they would bring girls back at the same time. So there were a lot of people who were about that night, all night. You know, there is a suggestion there that people will have seen and heard this.
That was an excerpt from our episode back in 2021, just describing what happened to Agnes Wanjiru. David, we've been going over the story as we knew it when we last spoke 4 years ago, the story of what happened that night, 13 years ago, when Agnes Wanjiru was murdered and left in a septic tank. Take us back to 2021, when we last spoke. How seriously were the authorities in Kenya taking the investigation back then?
The answer, I would argue, is not very. There had been a finding, quite a strong finding by a judge at Agnes's inquest. She basically quoted poems about the language of silence and this idea that Agnes was the 21-year-old mother of one from a really impoverished area in the back streets of Nanyuki. And it was a crime that could have well been forgotten, especially somewhere like Kenya. But they did reopen the investigation. We published 19 stories in the past 5 years where we tracked down everybody to do with the case. We published evidence. It's in the public domain.
The Sunday Times has published 19 stories in the intervening 4 years. What's been happening with the investigation? Why did it take them 4 years to issue an arrest warrant?
So there's obvious problems in that we're talking about the murder of a Kenyan national, and all the key witnesses are British nationals who were staying in the hotel at night. The issue is, so the UK and Kenya have a defence agreement in place, and that allows the UK to send thousands of our troops every year to go and train in Kenya. To do that, there was a legal framework drawn up between the two countries, which was called the Defence Cooperation Agreement. And somewhere within that, there are rules set out for when a British soldier commits a crime in Kenya, what happens. So what happened was the Kenyan authorities took jurisdiction. They became the primary investigator for this case. So the British authorities and the British military police were helping out. They were providing support, but they weren't taking the lead. Now, that has obvious logistical problems because you have a bunch of Kenyan detectives in Nairobi and they want to interview all the witnesses who are all around the northwest of England.
Yeah.
And so I think there were huge problems caused by the fact that the UK didn't take the lead on this. And that is just an absolute fact. And what the Ministry of Defence will say is that we've got this agreement in place. They've got jurisdiction. They're the primary investigators. What can we do? The point is that rules can change. Laws can change. That's the point of the government to create them. And also there's an argument anyway that if you speak to barristers will give you 25 different answers on this. And one of them is that if the British government had wanted to, they could have taken over the investigation and led it. That would have hugely sped up this process.
And David, when we last spoke, you and our old colleague, Hannah Al-Othman, you described the culture that existed in the army back in 2012 when all of this was happening. The excess drinking, the paying for sex, all things that I think most of us were quite shocked about. We're just going to listen back to a bit of our conversation back then. This is Hannah explaining what some British soldiers had told her.
He said this was a regular thing that, he gave examples of Germany and Cyprus. He would go out with his fellow soldiers, they would get very drunk and they would pick up multiple sex workers.
To paint a picture of the culture that had developed, the soldiers that David and Hannah interviewed told them about an unrelated brawl that took place the night before Agnes's disappearance at a bar near the Lions Court Inn.
To me, it was extraordinary. It might be a normal night out in Nanyuki for the soldiers, but my gosh, 200 Irish and Scots guards battering each other, a fight that started essentially as a row over football, Celtic and Rangers. And it just became this huge brawl. Military police were sent down to stop the fight. The military police got thrown off the balconies.
Sounds pretty extraordinary.
Well, it's described to me as like something out of a John Wayne film. I mean, it is literally like the Wild West. The soldiers train at the base all week, doing the hot weather training. And at the weekend, they're essentially released into Nanyuki. And everything is cheap, to British soldiers over there. The second thing is, these are large groups of young men who've been cooped up all week, and they're essentially unleashed onto an unsuspecting town, which has these little kind of bars, these hotspots where they know they can go and be accepted and spend money, and they are sleeping en masse with these local women. But I think there is an important distinction to be made. When we talk about sex workers in this country, we get an image of professional sex workers. In Nanyuki, they were basically local women. A lot of them have jobs in the day, but they know that by going out and essentially pulling a soldier and going back with him that night, and soldiers can pay around £30, although some of the women sleep with soldiers for much less, that is the equivalent of a week's salary. Nanyuki is a poor, poor area. I mean, it has some really extreme deprivation, particularly in the suburbs where Agnes was from. And the streets are essentially made up of shacks where people live, corrugated tin roofs and very basic walls. This is where these women are from. Some of them are reliant, and as Agnes was, on hooking up with a soldier and getting paid for it.
David, how much do you think has changed since then in terms of the culture of the military?
You get different answers on this. So what happened was, when we published all those 19 stories, there was, we're told, supposed to be root and branch reform of the entire culture of the armed forces, actually. So that's what this series of stories did. So the MOD introduced their zero tolerance to sexual exploitation and abuse policy 2022. Ben Wallace, who was Defence Sec at the time, he announced a new policy changing the culture of sexual harassment and discrimination and paying for sex. A policy document was released, and for the first time in the Army's 360-year history, transactional sex was banned for soldiers serving abroad. It basically abolished, because of our investigation, pretty much. So in theory, British soldiers who are serving in Kenya or any other country should not be paying for sex whilst on duty. Yes, we're still getting these stories of soldiers going out and misbehaving and getting themselves into trouble and using local women, but it's not widespread. The problem with these reviews as well is it depends on who's sitting there and giving you the evidence, because these regiments, let's face it, they are set up with the purpose of going to a foreign country and fighting side by side and potentially dying next to each other, aren't they? And that is their purpose, to defend the UK at home and abroad. And you are accepting the fact that you may die in the line of duty when you're joining the army and joining one of these regiments. So there is a real brotherhood. There's a camaraderie there. There's a loyalty there amongst soldiers. So it's difficult to get them to talk about their colleagues.
David, tell us about one of the other changes that occurred because of your stories, and that's in the way that the MOD now investigates potential crimes.
So the Sunday Times did two quite big investigations. So one of them was Agnes Wanjiru, and another one was looking at the conduct of the SAS in Afghanistan, which is now subject to a public inquiry. And as a result of doing those stories, what happened is the Royal Military Police, they had something called SIB, which was Serious Investigation Branch. And they were the team that were supposed to investigate the most complex crime in the armed forces. So Royal Military Police, I guess you could characterise them in two different ways. You've got the military police whose job it is to break up the barroom brawls and stick the handcuffs on and bring the soldiers back to base, put them in a cell overnight to cool off. And then you've got teams that are set up to investigate more complex crimes, the equivalent of a CID for a local police force would do. So after the Sunday Times' work on these two stories, it was scrapped, basically. It was completely scrapped. They had a judge, a retired High Court judge, look at what needed to change. And he made a series of recommendations. And now we've got a new unit, and that's called the Defence Serious Crime Unit, which is supposed to be the armed forces global police force, if you like. No matter where it is in the world, if British service people commit an offence, a serious offence, so we're talking about like sexual assault, murder, those sorts of offences, they're the ones who investigate. So really, this, I would argue, is their first big test since setting up the Agnes inquiry. So they provided support to the Kenyan police, who would fly in. They've been coming to the UK for the last couple of years, interviewing the soldiers. That unit would set up the interviews. They'd provide the logistics. The Kenyan detectives would provide the questions to be asked.
Yeah.
They carry out evidence gathering requests. So this is a big test for them. We now have a big forward step. I do think politically it was hugely helped by John Healey throwing his weight behind it.
And John Healey, we should just say, is the current Defence Secretary.
The wheels were in motion, but by John Healey meeting with the family this year in Kenya, I do think that sends a huge signal, not just to everybody at the Ministry of Defence and the military police, but also everybody in Kenya and Ruto, the Kenyan president, that this is a priority for the British government. And the wheels very slowly turned. And we saw a turn of the cog, a big turn of the cog this week. So let's see what happens.
And David, all the way through this, you've been in touch with Agnes's family, with her daughter, who was only a baby when it happened, to her niece and her family. What are your hopes for them now that they finally have an arrest warrant out? How do they feel?
I think they want closure, like any family who goes through something like this long term. And if you've got unanswered questions, or somebody's not been brought to justice, or the systemic failures, families will attach to that because it's something to fight for and to live for. I saw it with the Manchester Arena bomb families, that the Manchester public inquiry was really important at getting the truth about what MI5 knew and all the rest of it. So with Agnes's family, I think a trial is really important for them, because a lot of the detail and information about what really happened will be flushed out. And I think they want it to be over. So much has happened to them. They've lost people along the way. People have died in their family that campaigned for Agnes. I think for them, the idea that nobody has been punished for what they've done to Agnes, I think that is horrifying to them. And it's time now. It's time for justice to be served. It really is.
That was David Collins, Northern Editor at the Sunday Times. The producer today was Micaela Arneson. The executive producer was Kate Lamble. Sound design and theme composition were by Mal Assetto. Thanks for listening. We'll be back with more over the weekend.